My name is Margaret Ellison, and I'm 65 years old. For as long as I can remember, my world has revolved around the small, wooden country home my late husband Thomas and I built together just outside Boise, Idaho. It wasn't grand, but it was perfect. Nestled between tall pine trees and wild rose bushes, the house felt like a living part of us. Every nail, every creak in the floor carried a memory. I spent most mornings sitting by the large window with my coffee, watching sunlight fall across the old porch Thomas had built with his own hands. Since his passing 5 years ago, life had slowed down. I retired from my job as a high school art teacher, but I still painted, mostly landscapes, sometimes portraits of Thomas from old photographs. My days were simple, tending to my small garden, feeding the birds, and keeping the house just the way he left it. Evenings were quieter, sometimes too quiet. But I had found peace in that silence, convincing myself that I didn't need anything else. My two children, Ryan and Hannah, lived their own busy lives in the city. Ryan had a corporate job in Seattle, always buried in deadlines, while Hannah worked as a nurse in Boise. They called occasionally, and we met during holidays. I missed them terribly, but I never wanted to bother them. They have their lives now, I used to remind myself whenever loneliness crept in. That spring, the valley outside my home was more beautiful than ever. The river ran high, the apple trees bloomed, and the air smelled of new beginnings. I remember standing outside one morning watering the garden, thinking how lucky I was to still be here, to still call this house mine. It wasn't just wood and bricks. It was my connection to Thomas, my history, and my peace. But deep down, I often wondered how long I could manage everything alone. The paint was peeling, the roof needed work, and my savings were running thin. I'd tell myself I'd fix it next month, but next month always came and went. I wasn't ready to admit it, but part of me wished Ryan would offer to help someday. He had always been the responsible one, good with numbers, always in control. Little did I know that the help I had been quietly hoping for would come, but not in the way I imagined. It would come wrapped in fake concern, hidden under a smile that looked warm but felt cold. I had no idea that my peaceful life, built on years of love and memories, was about to be shaken from its very foundation. That morning, I painted a small picture of the house, surrounded by sunlight and blooming roses. I wrote a small note beneath it. Home is where love lives forever. I didn't know then how painfully true those words would become, or how much my faith in that love was about to be tested. It was early April when I got Ryan's call. "Mum," he said, his voice unusually cheerful, "Claire and I are thinking of visiting next weekend. It's been ages since we saw you." My heart lifted instantly. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. I'll make your favorite, chicken pot pie and apple crumble." He laughed lightly. "Sounds perfect." I spent the next few days preparing the house like a woman half my age. I scrubbed the kitchen counters, changed the curtains, and polished the old wooden table Thomas had built. When Hannah called to say she'd be joining too, my joy overflowed. For once, it would feel like a family again. Saturday morning arrived bright and golden. The sound of a car pulling up the driveway made me rush to the window. Ryan stepped out first, looking handsome in his crisp blue shirt. His wife, Claire, followed. Beautiful as ever, but with a calculating gaze I could never quite read. She hugged me lightly, her perfume too strong, her smile a bit too polite. "Mum, this place still looks the same," Ryan said, glancing around the yard. "It should," I laughed. "Your father designed every inch of it." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Yeah, Dad sure loved this house." We spent the afternoon talking, laughing, and reminiscing. Hannah arrived in the evening, full of energy and warmth, instantly lighting up the room. For a moment, I forgot the years of distance. I watched my children sit at the same table they'd grown up around, their laughter echoing through the old wooden walls. I felt complete. But something about Ryan's behavior that evening unsettled me. He kept asking casual questions about my expenses, the house's insurance, the land boundaries. Claire joined in, saying things like, "Such a big property for one person, don't you think?" I brushed it off as casual curiosity, not realizing they were planting seeds for something darker. After dinner, Ryan looked around the house thoughtfully. "Mum," he said softly, "you shouldn't be here alone. What if you fall or get sick? Maybe it's time I helped manage things. Just the paperwork, taxes, maintenance?" I smiled. "Oh, Ryan, that's sweet, but I'm doing fine. This house keeps me company." He nodded, though the glint in his eyes told a different story. That night, as everyone went to bed, I sat by the window again, looking at the moonlit garden. The laughter had faded, replaced by the sound of crickets and rustling leaves. Something inside me stirred, a strange unease I couldn't explain. Maybe it was just age catching up with me, I thought. Maybe I was overthinking. But if there's one thing I've learned in life, it's that a mother's heart often senses danger long before her mind can understand it. A few weeks after their visit, Ryan started calling more often. "Mum," he'd say, "I've been thinking about what we talked about. You shouldn't be worrying about maintenance or taxes at this stage of your life." His words sounded kind, thoughtful even. I found myself softening, grateful that he cared. He mentioned hiring a financial advisor, setting up automatic payments, and simplifying everything for my peace of mind. I didn't question his intentions. He was my son, the same boy who used to bring me daisies from the yard when he was 10. I believed in him without hesitation. One sunny afternoon, Ryan and Claire arrived unannounced. They brought pastries, coffee, and a folder. "Just some documents," Ryan said casually. "A few formalities that will make things easier when you eventually want to sell." "Sell?" I chuckled. "Oh, honey, I could never sell this place. It's all I have left of your father." He smiled. "Of course not, Mom. These papers are just about tax management. It'll help if anything happens, you know." "Just a precaution," Claire chimed in, her voice smooth and reassuring. "It's better this way, Margaret. We just want to protect what's yours." I hesitated for a second, but then Ryan held my hand and said softly, "Trust me, Mum." And so I did. I signed every paper he placed before me. My hand shook a little, but my heart was calm. "There," I said proudly. "Now you can stop worrying." He hugged me tightly, whispering, "You'll thank me later." When they left, I watched their car disappear down the dirt road. For some reason, a lump formed in my throat. Maybe I was just emotional. Maybe I was just grateful. But something about that phrase, "You'll thank me later," lingered in my mind longer than it should have. That night, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, the signed papers still on the table beside me. The wind picked up, scattering a few pages. I picked one up absent-mindedly and saw my own signature printed again and again. It looked strange, out of place. But I shook the thought away. "You're being silly, Margaret," I told myself. "He's just helping." I didn't know those signatures would soon become the weapon used to break my heart. Days passed peacefully, though something about Ryan's frequent calls felt unusual. He kept checking in, not to ask about my health or the garden, but about whether I'd received some official letters. I hadn't, and I told him so. Then one afternoon, while cleaning, I noticed the property file still sitting on my shelf. Out of curiosity, I flipped through it. The legal language meant little to me, but my name stood beside his in more places than I remembered. Still, I convinced myself it was fine. Ryan knew about property and taxes. I didn't. When Hannah visited that weekend, I mentioned it casually. "Ryan's been such a blessing lately," I said. He's helping me manage the house legally. Her face darkened. Legally? What kind of papers did you sign, Mum? Oh, just tax stuff, I replied, waving my hand. You worry too much. She frowned, but let it go, perhaps not wanting to upset me. A few days later, Ryan called again. Mum, everything's processed now. You can relax. I've taken care of everything. Thank you, sweetheart, I said, smiling. You always know how to help. He laughed quietly, and something in that laughter sent a chill down my spine. That night, I couldn't sleep. The wind howled through the valley, rattling the old windows. For the first time, I felt uneasy in the home that had always comforted me. Something invisible had shifted. I couldn't explain it, but it felt as if the house no longer belonged to me, not in spirit, but in some strange, foreboding way I couldn't understand. I brushed it off as loneliness and went back to painting the next morning. But no brushstroke could calm the growing unease in my chest. It was the silence before a storm I didn't yet see coming. It was a grey morning when the letter arrived. The envelope was official-looking, with bold black print across the top. Notice of eviction. I remember sitting at my kitchen table, staring at it for several seconds before opening it. My hands trembled as I read the words that didn't make sense at first. According to the letter, ownership of my house had been transferred to Claire's parents under a document signed by me and witnessed by Ryan. My first thought was that it had to be a mistake, maybe a clerical error, maybe a cruel joke. I grabbed the phone and called Ryan immediately. He answered after a few rings, his tone calm, almost detached. Ryan, I gasped, there's some kind of error. This letter says the house belongs to Claire's family now. What's going on? There was a pause. Then his voice came, flat and final. It's not an error, Mom. It's theirs now. You'll be fine in a smaller place. For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. The phone nearly slipped from my hand. You gave away our home? I whispered. It's better this way, he said coldly. You can't handle it anymore. Don't make this harder. Before I could speak again, the line went dead. I sat there in silence, staring at the phone, the letter crumpled in my trembling hand. Every sound around me, the ticking clock, the creak of the floor, suddenly felt strange, distant. That house had been my entire world, my last connection to Thomas, to the life we'd built together. And in one signature, one moment of blind trust, it was gone. Tears blurred the ink on the paper as I whispered, How could you do this, Ryan? How could you? Outside, the sky darkened. Rain began to fall softly against the window, and for the first time in my life, the home I loved so deeply no longer felt like mine. Margaret's hands shook as she held the eviction notice, the paper feeling heavier than anything she had ever lifted in her life. She sat by the window, the soft Idaho sun falling on her wrinkled fingers, tracing the trembling outlines of the printed words. Property ownership transfer. New legal owner. Her eyes blurred with tears as she read the names again and again. Ryan Ellison and Claire Bennett. It wasn't just her son's name on the paper. His wife's parents were listed as co-owners. Her heart sank. How could her son, her own flesh and blood, betray her like this? She grabbed the phone from the side table, dialing Ryan's number with shaking hands. The dial tone felt like an endless echo, and for a moment, she hoped he wouldn't answer. But then, his voice came through, calm and casual. Hey, Mom. Everything okay? Margaret's voice cracked. Ryan, what is this? Why did I get this notice saying I don't own my own house anymore? There was a pause, the kind that feels like a knife being slowly twisted. Ryan exhaled deeply. Mom, you're overreacting. I told you we'd handle the property paperwork. It's just easier this way. Claire's parents can manage the place better? Margaret felt her throat tighten. Manage? This was your father's house. The house he built with his hands. You can't just hand it over. Ryan's tone grew cold, almost rehearsed. Mum, you're living alone in a 5-bedroom house. It's not practical. We thought this would be best for everyone. Her voice rose, trembling with grief and disbelief. You thought? Without asking me? Without even telling me what I was signing? You lied to me, Ryan. He sighed again, irritation now in his voice. You're not understanding. It's already done. You'll be fine in a smaller place. Don't make this harder than it has to be. The line went silent for a few seconds. Margaret's tears rolled down her cheeks silently, her breathing uneven. Ryan, I gave you everything. Your father would be heartbroken to see this day. But he didn't respond. Only a faint click followed, and the call ended. Margaret sat frozen, the phone still pressed to her ear, as if hoping the silence would turn back into his voice. The voice of the son she once knew. But that son was gone, replaced by someone she didn't recognize anymore. The walls around her seemed to close in, the quiet of the old wooden house now heavy with betrayal. She walked through each room slowly, her fingers brushing over the faded family photographs. Ryan as a boy with scraped knees, his first day of school, his wedding day. Every memory now felt poisoned. That night, she didn't sleep. The sound of the wind outside felt louder than usual, almost like the house itself was crying with her. She sat by the fireplace, clutching a photo of her husband, whispering through broken sobs, John, our son took it all. Everything you built, everything we dreamed. When morning came, her eyes were swollen, her spirit crushed. She wasn't just losing a home, she was losing her family. Yet somewhere deep inside that heartbreak, something small began to stir. A whisper of strength, a refusal to let deceit write the final chapter of her story. She didn't know how, but she knew this wasn't the end. Something had to be done. The next week passed in a blur of pain, confusion, and boxes. Margaret moved slowly through the house, packing decades of memories into cardboard containers. Every photo frame, every painting, every vase had a story. Her late husband, John's woodworking tools, still sat neatly in the garage, untouched since his passing 8 years ago. She couldn't bring herself to pack them. They were a part of him, and leaving them behind felt like losing him all over again. Her daughter, Hannah, arrived 2 days later, her face pale with disbelief. Mum? He can't do this. Ryan can't just take the house like that. Margaret smiled weakly, her voice tired. He already did, honey. It's done. Hannah hugged her tightly, holding her mother as she cried silently into her shoulder. We'll figure something out, Hannah whispered. I promise. Together, they filled boxes with clothes, dishes, books, and photographs. The movers came 2 days later, strangers walking through her life, lifting pieces of it into a truck labeled Silver Star Moving Company. When the last box was sealed, Margaret stood at the front door, her hand resting on the old wooden frame. The same door John had, carved initials into M+J, 1981. She closed her eyes, remembering the day he finished building the porch, smiling as he said, "This house will keep our story safe forever." Now, that story was being stolen. As she turned to leave, she whispered, "Goodbye, my love," and stepped outside. Hannah drove her to a small apartment on the edge of Boise. It was clean but soulless. White walls, a faint smell of paint, and no garden, no birds, no laughter. That night, Margaret lay awake on her new bed, staring at the ceiling. The silence was unbearable. Her mind replayed every moment. Ryan's smile as he handed her the papers, his soft voice convincing her to trust him. She clenched her fists, whispering, "Why, Ryan? Why would you do this to me?" The tears came again, but behind them was something new. Anger. A quiet, burning anger that wouldn't go away this time. Somewhere deep inside, she felt her husband's words echo. Never let anyone take what's rightfully yours. Margaret wasn't ready to give up. She didn't know where to start. But she knew this wasn't over. Not yet. It was late one night when Hannah, sitting at her kitchen table, decided to go through the copies of the documents her brother had made their mother sign. The pages smelled faintly of ink, the kind of sharp scent that fills the air when something new is printed. But what she noticed first wasn't the smell, it was the date. "Mum," she called from the kitchen. "Come here for a second." Margaret shuffled over, her slippers soft against the tile. "What is it, dear?" Hannah spread the papers out. "Look at this date here, the notarization. It's a week before the day you signed. That's impossible. And look at this signature." She pointed to a faint scrawl at the bottom. John Ellison's name, Margaret's late husband. Margaret froze. "That's John's signature." Her voice trembled. "But he's been gone for 8 years." Hannah's eyes widened. "Ryan forged it, Mum. He must have used an old document, maybe from Dad's files, and traced it." For a moment, silence filled the room. Margaret's world tilted again. Betrayal was one thing, but forgery? Using her late husband's name to steal their home? It was beyond cruel. Hannah grabbed her phone. "I'm calling a lawyer." Margaret hesitated. "Sweetheart, he's still your brother." Hannah looked up, her eyes sharp. "No, Mom. Right now, he's a criminal." They met with a lawyer the next morning, a kind but determined woman named Angela Porter. Angela looked over the documents carefully, her brows furrowing as she examined the signatures. "There's a good chance this can be challenged," she said, "but it won't be easy." "He'll fight back." Margaret nodded slowly. "I don't care how long it takes. He stole what my husband built, what I trusted him with." For the first time in weeks, her voice didn't tremble. Angela smiled faintly. "Then we'll make this right." That night, Margaret sat by her small apartment window, watching the rain fall softly against the glass. The reflection of the city lights flickered in her eyes as she whispered, "John, I'm not giving up. Not this time." It was the first night she slept peacefully since losing her home. The next few weeks were a blur of meetings, phone calls, and paperwork. Margaret and Hannah spent hours gathering every piece of evidence they could find. Old letters, property tax receipts, and even photos of John's original blueprints for the house. Every detail mattered now. Angela, their lawyer, worked tirelessly. She compared signatures, filed motions, and brought in a handwriting expert. The report confirmed what they feared. John's signature had been forged using a digital scan. Ryan, when notified of the legal challenge, called Margaret for the first time in weeks. "Mum, why are you doing this?" he asked, his tone defensive. "You're making a big mistake." Margaret's reply was calm, but cold. "No, Ryan. You did. The court date was set." As it approached, Margaret's anxiety grew. She wasn't afraid of losing. She was afraid of seeing the face of the boy she once rocked to sleep, now a man who had betrayed her completely. Hannah stayed by her side every day. "We're going to win this, Mom," she said. "Dad would be proud of you." Margaret smiled faintly, her eyes glistening. "I hope so, sweetheart. I just want his memory to rest in peace again." When the day came, she wore her husband's old watch, a symbol of the strength she had once shared with him. She knew she wasn't walking into that courtroom alone. The courtroom felt colder than she expected. The marble floors, the wooden benches, the soft hum of whispers. Everything felt distant, like a dream she wanted to wake up from. Ryan sat on the other side of the room with his wife, Claire, and her parents. His eyes flickered toward his mother, but there was no remorse, only discomfort. Margaret's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her glasses, trying not to meet his gaze. The judge called the case to order. The lawyer, Angela, presented the evidence: the mismatched dates, the forged signature, the handwriting analysis. The room grew silent as the judge examined the documents. "Mr. Ellison," the judge said, looking directly at Ryan, "can you explain how your deceased father's signature appears on a legal document from this year?" Ryan swallowed hard. It must have been a mistake, maybe an old file. But Angela cut in. "Your Honor, this was intentional. My client's son manipulated her into signing over her home under false pretenses and used her late husband's forged signature to validate it." Gasps filled the room. Margaret closed her eyes. Her heart hurt, but she stayed strong. Finally, the judge turned to her. "Mrs. Ellison, would you like to say anything?" Margaret stood slowly, her voice calm, but filled with pain. "Your Honor, he didn't just take my house. He took my trust, my memories, my husband's legacy. I raised him with love, and he sold that love for greed." The judge nodded solemnly. "Thank you, Mrs. Ellison." When the verdict came, it was clear. The property would be returned to Margaret Ellison. Ryan's actions would be reported for fraud and forgery. As she walked out of the courtroom, Hannah held her hand tightly. Margaret looked back once at Ryan. Her eyes filled not with anger, but with quiet sadness. She whispered under her breath, "You lost much more than a house today, my son." When the gavel struck, the sound echoed in Margaret's heart like a final goodbye to the pain she had been carrying. The courtroom went silent, the decision standing tall. The country house was rightfully hers again. Ryan's fraudulent act was proven beyond doubt. The forged signature, the fake notarization, the lies, all laid bare before the law. For a long moment, Margaret didn't move. She simply stood there, breathing, feeling the weight of months of heartbreak begin to lift. Outside the courthouse, the sky was pale blue. The spring wind brushed gently against her face as Hannah hugged her tightly. "You did it, Mom." "We did it," she whispered, her voice trembling with relief. Margaret smiled faintly, the corners of her eyes wet. "No, sweetheart," she said softly. "Truth did." But inside, the victory didn't taste sweet. When Ryan walked past her, escorted by his lawyer, their eyes met briefly. His face was pale, his shoulders hunched, the arrogance gone. Margaret wanted to hate him, to scream, to demand an explanation. But all she felt was a hollow sadness. "Ryan," she called softly. He stopped, avoiding her gaze. "I hope one day you understand what you've done," she said quietly. "Not to me, but to yourself." He said nothing, just nodded slightly and walked away. Claire followed behind him, her face red with embarrassment. The news spread, fast, in Boise. Ryan lost his job at the real estate firm within a week. The scandal followed him everywhere. Margaret, however, stayed silent. She refused interviews, refused pity. She didn't want attention. She wanted peace. The following week, she returned to her old country house. Dust had gathered on the windows, and the garden had grown wild without her care. Yet, as she stepped onto the porch, the wood creaked beneath her feet like an old friend whispering, "Welcome home." She stood there for a long time, the wind rustling through the trees. Her husband's spirit felt alive in that air, comforting, forgiving. For the first time in months, she smiled genuinely. "We're home again, John," she whispered. "But maybe not for long." Because deep inside, she knew this house was more than just bricks and walls. It was a story, one built with love, lost to greed, and reclaimed by truth. And that story deserved a better ending than bitterness. That night, Margaret couldn't sleep. She walked through each room slowly, her hands brushing over the old furniture, the photos, the worn-out paint. She remembered the laughter, The birthdays, the Christmases spent decorating the living room with her husband and children. But now, those memories hurt. The house no longer felt like a home. It felt like a reminder of betrayal, of tears, of things broken beyond repair. When morning came, she made herself a cup of tea and sat on the porch, watching the sunrise. The light fell gently across the fields, and she felt her husband's words echo in her heart. Give love, even when it's hardest. By noon, Margaret made a decision that surprised everyone. She called Hannah and said, "Sweetheart, I'm donating the house." Hannah's voice on the phone was startled. "What? Mum? You just got it back?" "I know," Margaret said quietly, "but this house doesn't belong to me anymore. It belongs to what we lost, and to those who still have nothing." She reached out to a local women's shelter she had once volunteered for, the Willow Haven Home for Women and Children. They had been struggling to find a permanent space. When Margaret offered her country house, the director broke into tears over the phone. 2 weeks later, she signed the papers again, this time with full understanding, full control, and full heart. When the lawyer handed her the final document, she smiled. Now it's truly in good hands. That evening, standing outside the shelter's future home, she felt lighter than she had in years. It wasn't about loss anymore. It was about purpose. She looked up at the sky and whispered, "John, we built this home with love, and love deserves to keep living." It was a quiet Sunday afternoon when Ryan appeared at Margaret's small apartment door. His hair was unkempt, his eyes hollow, and his clothes wrinkled. He looked nothing like the confident man who once stood over her with arrogance. He stood silently for a moment before saying, "Mum, can I come in?" Margaret nodded. She didn't speak, just stepped aside. He entered, his gaze falling on the modest room, the bookshelf, the potted plants, the single photo of their family before everything went wrong. He took a deep breath. "I've lost everything," he said quietly. "My job, my reputation. Even Claire left. I was wrong, Mum. I thought I was helping everyone, but I was just helping myself." Margaret listened in silence, her face unreadable. Finally, she spoke softly. "Ryan, I didn't raise you to chase money. I raised you to chase decency." He looked down, tears forming in his eyes. "I know. I don't deserve your forgiveness." Margaret sighed, her voice breaking just slightly. "No, you don't," she said honestly. "But forgiveness isn't about deserving. It's about peace." He looked up, confused. "You forgave me?" She nodded slowly. "I forgave you the moment I gave that house away. Holding on to hate would only keep me tied to your mistakes. But Ryan, forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. You need to live differently now. Not for me. For yourself." Ryan nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I'll try, Mum. I swear I'll try." Before leaving, he hesitated at the door. "I don't know how to thank you." Margaret smiled faintly. "Don't thank me. Just be someone your father would have been proud of." As he left, she felt a strange calm wash over her. The wound hadn't disappeared, but it had finally stopped bleeding. In the months that followed, Margaret began volunteering full-time at the Willow Haven shelter, the same home that once belonged to her. The building had transformed beautifully. The walls were freshly painted in soft pastel colors, children's laughter filled the halls, and the once empty rooms were now filled with warmth and hope. She taught art classes twice a week, helping the women and children express their pain through colors and brushes. "Every stroke," she told them, "is a piece of your heart learning to heal." Hannah often visited, helping organize fundraisers and community events. Sometimes they would sit on the front porch together, drinking lemonade and talking about John, the man who started it all with a hammer, wood, and dreams. One afternoon, a little girl from the shelter handed Margaret a drawing. a picture of a big yellow house with smiling faces. "This is your house," the girl said sweetly. "It's full of love now." Margaret smiled, tears glimmering in her eyes. "Yes," she whispered, "it finally is." Her days were peaceful, her nights calm. For the first time in years, she didn't wake up with sadness. Instead, she woke up with purpose. The same walls that once witnessed betrayal were now echoing with second chances. One cool autumn evening, Margaret sat on the porch of the shelter, the sun dipping below the hills, painting the sky in gold and orange. She held an old photo of her husband, his smile warm, his eyes kind. She whispered softly, "We built something good, didn't we, John? Even after everything." It still stands, as the wind rustled through the trees. She felt his presence in the quiet air. A peace she hadn't known in years settled deep within her. Margaret had lost her home once, to betrayal, to greed, to heartbreak. But in the end, she found something far greater: forgiveness, strength, and meaning. She realized that some homes are made of wood and stone, but the real ones, the ones that last, are made of love, forgiveness, and faith. Looking out at the children playing in the yard, she smiled. This, she thought, is what it means to rebuild. Lesson: love built on honesty lasts forever. Greed destroys everything it touches.